Pilot you wrote.
I call it The Barn.
The Barn.
FX changed its title to Rampart when they were going to put it on the air for about 2 weeks, and then we changed it to The Shield. The impetus for writing it was mostly that, I lived and worked in this city where this kind of stuff was going on. And I was sort of young and idealistic, and it was kind of shocking to me. Maybe I shouldn't have been shocked, and it'd be tougher to shock me now, but at the time, to read about, the things that were being done, and once again, I just want to stress, it was by a very small contingent of the police department. It wasn't the entire police department, but, this one small cell in the police department doing these things was shocking, and it hit close to home. It was happening on streets that I drove on. It was happening in neighborhoods that I frequented, and I just wanted to write about it, I guess, in retrospect, to help myself understand it. How does that happen? Now, I'm not saying that what we did on The Shield is an explanation for the Rampart scandal, because I don't know the people involved in the Rampart scandal. I don't know what their motivations were. What I came up was a fictionalized universe where I could write about Vic Mackey and Shane Vendrell and these other characters, and I could see from their perspective why they did the things they did. I just tried to write what I thought was true and try to understand how a situation like the Rampart scandal could happen. Who would be at the center of it? Why would it be covered up by people high up in the police organization for so long? Oh, because, yeah, they may do some bad things, but guess what? They're effective. And the law-abiding citizens feel safer. That's interesting to me.
Rampart covers the area surrounding MacArthur Park. It's west of downtown from MacArthur Park up through Echo Park. It's kind of a rundown division west of Central Core City, west of downtown. It's among the poorest divisions in the city. In Los Angeles, the LAPD has LA divided into 18 divisions. Rampart is one of them. It's the most densely populated. There are a lot of immigrants there. And if you're illegal, it's probably where you're going to end up. You come in, there are Salvadoran immigrants, Mexican, Guatemalan, from all through Latin and Central America. MacArthur Park and the Rampart Division is the first place you land. You start working from there.
This park where you're standing at right here was actually the Wanderers actually, which is a gang up the street. Then you had 18th Street on the other side of the park. Then you had Crazy Riders on the other side of the park.
There are several gangs. There was probably a couple hundred just there. The Orphans Gang, the 18th Street, Mara Salvatrucha MS, the Easy Riders, the Playboys.
So every corner was controlled by certain people, selling drugs, and some cops actually used to know who was selling them, and sometimes they used to actually, some of them actually used to get paid off, it was big. It was big. I got shot in that. You wanna go down there and
yeah, let's
shoot
go
that?
down. Yeah, let's go down. Yeah.
I got shot because I was selling crack in that park, and my family came from Central America, Guatemala, and Belize. Growing up in these neighborhoods was very, very rough. It was the era of the crack era, and a lot of these neighborhoods were flooded with crack cocaine and also heroin. So there was a lot of violence. There was a lot of young kids that were ballers, It was an era where everybody wanted to actually make money, I was one of those individuals.
Drugs have definitely always played a big part in Rampart, particularly in the area of MacArthur Park. MacArthur Park was a location where you could literally drive through and you would be almost attacked by people selling raw cocaine back in the 80s and 90s. That's when it was flourishing the most.
And the sidewalks are controlled by small-time crime networks. Street gangs, and then the sort of larger superstructure of the Mexican mafia, the MA.
We have to look at this issue in a historical context of why people are here in the first place. And we see that in Central America, in Nicaragua, Guatemala, and El Salvador, there was civil wars that were happening there.
A lot of them came here in the 80s fleeing a civil war from El Salvador or Guatemala. So everybody knew each other, and half of this neighborhood didn't speak English.
For the most part, these people migrate into communities where they're able to afford housing, they're able to get employment, and for the most part, these communities also lack a lot of services. You know, they're exposed to gangs in those communities, they're exposed to drugs, they're exposed to prostitution and other means of underground economy in those communities. They try to seek their own identity now in this country. And, when you have gangs such as the Mara Salvatrucha or 18th Street that initiated in Los Angeles but have been known as being called as Central American, then those are another things that they relate to.
When people were discriminating us because the way we talked English growing up, or Chicano gangs picking on us because we didn't really fit their criteria of dress or the way they wanted us to be, we all kind of just stuck together.
They're a minority in a minority community. They get preyed upon, and these street gangs are essential self-defense organizations.
It doesn't take much to start a gang. It takes a group of kids that are seeking somewhat to belong to. And if the community does not provide that, they seek what's there. And that's why we have this gang problem in certain communities.
We were young, going to the same school. Maybe some of them were our neighbors in this neighborhood, so we actually had to get orientated by some of them, not all of them, but some of them. But it was very hard for us growing up here in this neighborhood.
For the most part, it's a small percentage of people that join the gangs in these communities, but the small percentage were the kids that were most traumatized. So in my case, I was seeking something to where I felt accepted. I was searching somewhere that I could diffuse that anger, that sense of abandonment, because my parents fled El Salvador in the mid-70s, and they sent for me 5 years later. By the time, I didn't know who my parents were. I couldn't identify them. So this sense of abandonment, no matter what excuse they gave me that they wanted to provide a better life for me, the sense of abandonment, you couldn't just justify it.
It was everybody's spots, because back then everybody was making money, If you were not gangbang, you were making money. If you were not doing that, you were addicted, Or if you were not doing that, then you were in jail because somebody framed you. So growing up as an adolescent and seeing your homeboy at 16 years old and actually has a Mercedes Benz, and you're 16 years old and he has all the women around him.
What happened in Rampart was the street gang started to really get a handle on the life of the community. Anybody who had a commercial business, a shop in Rampart Division, had to pay rent to street gangs not to get trashed. And there's a drug trade, like there is in any part of the city, but when it's in a poor neighborhood like that, it's on the street. And those drug dealers were all paying off to different street gangs, rival street gangs.
During the 80s and 90s, with the growth in the drug trade, the gangs were becoming much more sophisticated, much more violent, much more wealthy. And so there's no reason to deny what what police were up against, what these communities who had to live around these gangs were up against during that time.
Homicides were at something like 2,000 a year and going up from there. Rampart had more homicides than any other division in the city, except maybe 77th. I mean, it was very tough. And the LAPD was feeling a lot of pressure, and they were responding the way the LAPD has responded for a long time.
The crash unit was formed to try to deal with this. I think the problem became that the ends were thought to justify the means, and then the means became increasingly important.
The whole idea of Crash was to smash these gangs, and Rampart was one of the toughest divisions, some of the toughest gang members, and consequently the cops in the Rampart division considered themselves their job was to be tougher than the gangbangers.
Crash was a gang unit that was designed specifically just to develop intelligence on the gangs, to work the gangs, and to make arrests of gang members.
They had an intelligence mission. It was not just an enforcement mission. They were to go out and find out stuff about the gangs, interact with the gangs, and become much more intimate with them.
The acronym for Crash is Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums. But the point of Crash is the acronym. It's Crash. That's what they're going to do, and that's what they set out to do. And then in Rampart, it just got a little out of hand.
Not a lot of people were paying a lot of attention to what the Crash units were doing, and the oversight was not as strong as you might expect, especially for a unit that's going to have so much temptation and drugs and opportunities for corruption all around them.
They considered themselves a gang in certain ways, and they talked to the gang members about how we're the toughest gang in town and you guys are through.
Rampart Crash Unit had a motto that was we intimidate those who intimidate others, and police officers had to be strong in order to deal with the gang element, because a lot of these guys, they had no respect for the law, and they were out there killing innocent people and committing crimes. And so yes, in many respects they were successful.
There's no doubt that what happened was the city decided that one of its highest priorities had to be to fight street gangs. They created special units, crash units, to do so. Those crash units developed their own identity, and it was a very macho, aggressive identity. And it really became an identity where almost anything was okay so as to get at the end of fighting street gangs. And the mentality of the officers, and Perez expressed it, I heard it expressed to me, was, well, if this gang member didn't commit this crime, he committed some other crime, so it becomes okay to frame him. And that's really the moment at which the ends come to justify really important means.
What happened here with Rampart, what you saw was good guys morphing and turning into bad guys. Okay, it's very inaccurate to characterize that it was a couple of bad apples, because from my personal viewpoint, I saw this happening department-wide. I had partners, I had family members that became involved with what was known as the Rampart scandal. Okay, and of course, what fed the Rampart scandal was something that is known as very popularly as the Code of Silence.
Just like any gang member honors a code of silence, when you're in a gang, even if you're an ex-gang member or have retired from the gang life or whatever you do, you grow up with that belief system of not snitching. And they honor the same code. They just have badges and batons and guns, but it's still the same structure.
The Code of Silence was, I would say, it was tantamount to a father who molests their children. No one's going to say anything. They stay quiet until you have an incident which brings forth what's really going on. In this case, what we had here with the Rampart scandal, we had Rafael Perez.
The Rampart scandal became public because Rafael Perez wanted to make a deal.
Ray Perez was the center of the Rampart story. He's where it came from. He went to the DA and struck a deal and started talking about everything that went on in that division.
He got caught stealing cocaine from the police evidence room and replacing it with flour.
He had the whole LAPD system completely worked out.
Apparently he'd been doing it for a while, and then got careless. One time he took the cocaine, didn't put the flour in, and they caught him. Right before he was facing retrial, he said, "I'll tell you about the Rampart scandal in exchange for a much reduced sentence."
It was true as well that while Ray Perez was completely out of hand, so was the